Look around you and listen. A refrigerator hums softly in the corner, air moves through vents. Distant traffic murmurs outside. Perhaps a clock ticks, a phone vibrates, fabric brushes quietly as you shift your weight. To your ears, this is the texture of the present moment. It seems complete, as though the sounds you perceive are the full acoustic story of where you are. Yet all around you, at this very instant, there is a far richer ocean of vibration, waves of pressure rippling through air, through walls, through the ground and your own body that you will never hear. Dogs catch the sharp hiss of a whistle that is utterly silent to you. Bats navigate with flashes of ultrasonic pulses, building detailed images from echoes in frequencies that never reach your awareness. Elephants murmur with infrasound that slides under your threshold of hearing, carrying information across kilometers of savanna while you sense, at most, a vague unease. Machines, storms, even the slow flexing of the earth itself all generate vibrations that pass through you unnoticed. You live in a vast, vibrating world, but your hearing opens only a narrow window onto it. This screenplay is a slow, continuous journey through that hidden world. It moves without dialogue or abruptness, drifting from physics to anatomy, from evolution to perception, in a quiet attempt to answer a deceptively simple question: why can humans hear only certain sounds and not others? Why do some vibrations count as sound while others remain forever silent to us, even though instruments show they are there? As you follow this story, imagine yourself floating in a dark, calm space, surrounded not by silence but by waves of pressure of every frequency and amplitude. Some of those waves will, at times, line up just right with the structures of your ear and the timing of your neurons, and those will bloom into the experience you call sound. Others will pass through, felt only as a pressure in the chest, or not felt at all. The difference is not in the waves themselves, but in the ways your body and brain are tuned. We will move gently through that tuning. First, by understanding what sound actually is apart from our perception. Then, by walking through the structures of the human ear, seeing how they limit and shape what we can hear. We will look at the microscopic world of hair cells and neurons that must keep up with every vibration, and at the long history of evolution that decided which frequencies were worth the cost of listening to. We will wander among the deep rumbles of infrasound and the quick, sharp pulses of ultrasound, and then return to the brain itself, where attention and interpretation erase even more of the world's vibrations before they become experience. By the end, you will not hear more than you did before, but you may feel differently about what you call silence, and about the narrow band of sound that accompanies you into sleep. Sound, before it becomes hearing, is simply motion. It is a compression and rarefaction of a medium air, water, or solid matter as energy passes through. A sound wave is not an object but a pattern, regions where molecules crowd closer together, followed by regions where they spread slightly farther apart, all moving outward from a source. A hand clap, a falling book, a bird's call, and an engine starting are all events that disturb the medium and send these patterns radiating away, fading as distance and absorption sap their energy. 3 basic quantities describe these waves. Frequency tells how many cycles of compression and rarefaction pass a point each second. It is measured in hertz, and in perception it corresponds roughly to pitch. Low frequencies as deep tones, high frequencies as sharp, bright ones. Wavelength tells how far the wave travels in one cycle, a distance that shrinks as frequency rises for a given medium. Amplitude describes how strong the pressure fluctuations are, corresponding in perception to loudness. Larger swings in pressure feel louder, smaller ones softer, though the mapping is not perfectly linear. In principle, there is no minimum or maximum to frequency. One can imagine a very slow oscillation, where the air pressure rises and falls once over minutes or hours. One can also imagine incredibly rapid vibrations, millions or billions of cycles per second. Physically, these are all sound waves if they are mechanical vibrations in a medium. But to a human ear, only a narrow band from roughly 20 cycles per second up to perhaps 20,000 in youth registers as sound. Below that, the waves become infrasound. Above that, they become ultrasound. They are not different in essence, they are simply waves no longer captured by our senses. The world does not respect the boundaries of our hearing. Thunderheads rolling across a distant plain generate infrasound that can travel hundreds of kilometers, wrapping gently around obstacles, carrying information about the storm's power and distance. Ocean waves beating against cliffs launch ultra-low frequency tremors that instruments register as a constant background rumble. At the opposite extreme, the tiny wings of insects beat, and the slips and snaps of very fine materials crackle, producing high-frequency components that extend well beyond what we can hear. Many of these vibrations overlap the band we do hear, yet much of the content lies outside it. To call sounds too low or too high is therefore to comment not on the waves themselves, but on the limits of the system that would need to follow them, the ear and the brain. Somewhere between those deep, slow rumbles and those quick, sharp flickers of pressure, the machinery begins to fail. The eardrum does not move enough, the chain of bones does not transmit efficiently, the cochlea does not respond, the hair cells do not open their channels in time, neurons cannot keep up. The wave is there in the air, but nothing in the body translates it into a pattern of nerve impulses that the brain can interpret as sound. In this way, sound is both an objective and a subjective phenomenon. As vibration, it exists whether or not any creature is listening. As hearing, it exists only when a particular constellation of anatomy and biology is present. The boundaries of human hearing, and the reason we cannot hear certain sounds, emerge from the details of that constellation. The journey of a sound wave into human awareness begins with the outer ear. The pinna, that familiar curve of cartilage on the side of your head, is not just an ornament, it shapes the incoming sound. Its ridges and falls reflect and diffract different frequencies in subtly different ways, creating patterns that help the brain infer the direction of sound in the vertical plane. The ear canal acts as a resonant tube, amplifying certain mid-frequencies that happen to be important for human speech. When a wave reaches the end of the canal, it encounters the tympanic membrane, or eardrum, a thin, taut sheet of tissue stretched across the opening of the middle layer. The fluctuating air pressure pushes and pulls on this membrane, making it vibrate. These vibrations are tiny. At the threshold of hearing, the eardrum moves less than the diameter of a hydrogen atom. At very high volumes, it swings farther, but still within microscopic distances. Attached to the eardrum is the first of three tiny bones, the ossicles, the malleus, incus, and stapes. Together, these bones form a lever system that matches the low impedance of air to the higher impedance of the fluid-filled inner ear. In effect, they concentrate the energy from the relatively large surface area of the eardrum onto the much smaller oval window of the cochlea, increasing the effective pressure. They can also adjust their stiffness through small muscles, offering a degree of protection against sustained loud sounds. Each component in this chain has resonant properties and mechanical limits. The eardrum responds best to frequencies in the mid-range. At very low frequencies, it moves slowly and greatly, sometimes more as a change in pressure than a crisp vibration. At very high frequencies, its mass and tension limit its ability to follow the rapid oscillations. The ossicles, too, become less effective at very high and very low frequencies, either transmitting fluctuations poorly or dissipating them. Beyond the oval window lies the cochlea, the true heart of hearing. This snail-shaped, fluid-filled structure coils around a central axis, splitting into two main chambers separated by the basilar membrane. Along this membrane, a remarkable transformation occurs. The continuous spectrum of incoming frequencies is spatially decomposed. Near the base of the cochlea, the membrane is narrow and stiff, resonating best with high frequencies. Toward the apex, it becomes wider and more flexible, favoring low frequencies. A pure tone entering the cochlea therefore sets up a traveling wave that peaks at a specific location along the membrane, with the position corresponding to its frequency. Perched along the basilar membrane are the hair cells, the true sensory receptors of hearing. Outer hair cells act as active amplifiers, sharpening and boosting the motion of the membrane for certain frequencies. Inner hair cells convert that motion into electrical signals, their tiny hair-like projections bending with the movement of the surrounding fluid and structures. When these hairs deflect in one direction, tension on microscopic tip links opens ion channels, letting positively charged ions rush in and depolarize the cell. This, in turn, triggers neurotransmitter release onto the fibers of the auditory nerve. The mechanical design of the cochlea and the tuning of its hair cells define, in large part, the frequencies humans can hear. There are only so many turns in the cochlear spiral, only so much length along the basilar membrane. The stiffness gradient is such that frequencies below about 20 cycles per second do not produce a sharply tuned peak anywhere. The entire membrane moves slowly, more like a pressure change than a vibration differentiated in space. At the other extreme, frequencies above roughly 20,000 cycles per second would require a degree of stiffness and responsiveness at the base that human tissues and hair cells do not achieve. The cochlea has, in effect, a built-in bandpass filter. Even within that anatomical band, other constraints narrow effective hearing. the eardrum and ossicles are tuned to frequencies important for speech and environmental awareness. The small size of the human head and the distance between the ears favor certain wavelengths for localization. The overall design reflects not a desire to capture every possible sound, but to capture, well, those that mattered over millions of years of evolution. At the microscopic level, the limits of hearing are written in the behavior of hair cells and neurons. Inner hair cells are exquisitely sensitive, but they respond only when deflection of their stereocilia reaches a certain threshold. Very low-frequency vibrations may move the hair bundles so slowly that ion channels do not open and close in a pattern the cell can interpret as sound. Instead, these slow changes may be experienced as a sense of pressure or fullness, if they are noticed at all. At very high frequencies, the situation is different. The basilar membrane at the base of a cochlea can, in principle, move at high speeds, but the coupling between that motion and the hair cell bundles becomes less efficient. The viscous damping of the surrounding fluid, the inertia of the hair bundles, and the kinetics of the ion channels all impose limits on how quickly the system can respond. If the vibration flips direction tens of thousands of times per second, the mechanical and molecular machinery may simply be unable to open and close channels in step. Once signals reach the auditory nerve, additional constraints appear. Neurons communicate with action potentials, brief spikes of voltage that travel along their axons. These spikes have a refractory period, a minimum time between them. At low frequencies, auditory nerve fibers can phase lock. They fire in sync with particular phases of the sound wave, encoding its fine temporal structure. At higher frequencies, they can no longer follow every cycle and instead shift to rate codes, where the average firing rate reflects the sound's power at a given place in the basilar membrane. There is, therefore, an upper limit beyond which neurons cannot represent the rapid oscillations of a sound wave, at least not in a way that preserves phase information. Humans can perceive frequencies up to about 20 kHz when young, but the neural representation of those frequencies is already more abstract, relying on where along the cochlea the signal originates rather than on precise timing. Together, these factors, the mechanical properties of the ear, the sensitivity of hair cells, the firing patterns of neurons define the human hearing range. Sounds whose frequencies fall well below or above these limits do not produce patterns of neural activity that the brain recognizes as sound. They exist as physical vibrations, but not as experiences. From an evolutionary perspective, this narrowing of hearing is not a failing but a solution. Every sensory system carries costs. It requires physical structures to receive signals, neural tissue to process them, and metabolic energy to maintain it all. There is no advantage in detecting signals that do not help an organism survive and reproduce. In fact, an overabundance of sensory information can be detrimental, overwhelming the brain's capacity to extract what matters. For our distant ancestors, hearing needed to solve specific problems. It had to detect the approach of predators rustling in grass or branches, the calls of conspecifics, the movements of prey, the crack and creak of shifting branches or rocks. It had to support communication first through simple calls and later through the complex patterns of speech. The range of frequencies most informative for these tasks fell within a relatively narrow band. Very low frequencies travel far and pass through obstacles, but they carry little detailed information about local events. Very high frequencies can carry fine detail and are useful for small animals and echolocators, but they attenuate quickly in air and are less useful over distance. For an upright primate moving through varied terrain, the trade-off favored a middle band, sensitive enough to detect important environmental cues and the nuances of vocal communication, but not so broad as to be wasteful. Comparative hearing across species reveals this tuning. Dogs hear higher frequencies than humans, allowing them to detect the small, sharp noises made by rodents and other small animals. Cats hear even higher, tuned further toward the ultrasonic squeaks of their prey. Bats extend this pattern to its extreme, using ultrasound not just to hear but to see with sound. Their entire auditory system is specialized for generating, receiving, and interpreting rapid, high-frequency echoes that paint a picture of the world in exquisite temporal detail. Elephants, by contrast, lean into the low end. Their massive bodies and thick tissues favor the transmission of low-frequency vibrations. They communicate with infrasound that can travel kilometers, bending around obstacles and immersing other elephants in information about identity, emotion, and intent. Their hearing range extends below ours, giving them access to a slow, powerful layer of acoustic reality we barely sense. Whales and other large marine mammals exploit both extremes, using very low frequencies to communicate over ocean basin scales and higher frequencies for more detailed, local information. Birds have hearing tuned to the frequencies of their songs and calls. Insects detect vibrations in the air or in plant stems that matter for mating, predation, or escape. In every case, hearing is shaped by ecology. The physics of sound in a given environment, the size and body plan of the animal, and the behavioral needs of the species combine to define an optimal band of sensitivity. Humans are no different. Our hearing is not universal, it is an adaptation to a specific way of life. That adaptation includes trade-offs. Higher frequency sensitivity requires smaller, lighter auditory structures and the brain equipped to process rapid temporal changes. Expanded low-frequency sensitivity requires larger structures and the ability to distinguish relevant signals from the constant background of slow environmental rumble. Both ends of the spectrum cost energy and complexity. Evolution, acting without foresight, settles on ranges that are good enough, not perfect. The sounds humans cannot hear are, in this sense, those evolution decided we did not need. We do not hear like a bat because we do not navigate by echolocation. We do not hear like an elephant because our social and environmental needs did not demand such long-range, low-frequency communication. Our hearing is a compromise, one that served our ancestors well. Yet the world they inhabited, and the world you inhabit now, is full of infrasound and ultrasound, currents of vibration flowing past you at all times. To explore those, we descend first into the depths to the realm of infrasound, the slow, deep murmur below awareness. Infrasound occupies the region below the conventional lower limit of human hearing, beneath about 20 cycles per second. In this realm, each wave crests and falls slowly, so slowly that you could count the seconds between peaks if you could perceive them. Most people cannot, at least not as distinct tones. Yet these slow waves are all around you, threading quietly through the air and the ground. Thunderstorms are prolific sources of infrasound. When lightning rips through the sky and thunder rolls, the audible crack and rumble are only part of the event. Below the sounds you recognize, the storm launches deep waves that travel far beyond the horizon, bending around hills and buildings, sliding under doors and through walls. Volcanic eruptions, even small ones, send infrasound waves through the atmosphere that can be detected by sensors half a world away. Large ocean waves slamming into cliffs or each other generate infrasound that merges into a constant, low murmur. Human-made structures and machines add their own deep voices. Wind turbines, industrial fans, heavy engines, and even tall buildings swaying gently in the wind can produce infrasound. Sometimes these waves are strong enough to be felt as a sense of pressure in the head or chest. Occasionally, they can resonate with parts of the body or the spaces within buildings, amplifying particular frequencies. Because infrasound wavelengths are so long, tens to hundreds of meters or more, they interact with objects differently than higher frequency sounds. Instead of bouncing readily off small obstacles, they flow around them. This makes infrasound excellent for long-distance propagation. Elephants, for example, exploit this property for communication. Their low-frequency rumbles can travel kilometers through air and even farther through the ground, allowing herds to coordinate movements and share information across wide distances. Humans, however, are poor receivers for such slow vibrations. The physical structures of the ear, tuned to respond to quicker fluctuations, translate some infrasound into a vague sense of pressure, but the cochlea does not create a sharply localized traveling wave for these frequencies. Instead, much of the basal membrane moves together, and the hair cells do not receive the kind of distinct, frequency-specific stimulation that would lead to a clear pitch percept. When infrasound is strong enough, people may feel unease, dizziness, or a sense that something is wrong. Some researchers have suggested that very low-frequency vibrations near the natural resonance frequencies of the eyeball or other tissues might contribute to feelings of fear or the sense of a presence in supposedly haunted places. These ideas remain controversial and difficult to test, but they illustrate a key point: vibrations below the threshold of hearing can still interact with the body and nervous system in subtle ways. In practical terms, much of the infrasound around you passes unnoticed. Seismographs and specialized microphones record it, showing that even on quiet days, the atmosphere and ground vibrate with low-frequency waves from distant storms, ocean activity, and human industry. You inhabit a world in which the earth itself hums continuously, yet your hearing system treats most of that hum as background, or ignores it entirely. Ultrasound lies at the opposite end of the spectrum, above the conventional upper limit of human hearing. These are sounds with frequencies higher than about 20,000 cycles per second. Their wavelengths are very short, from the order of centimeters or less in air, making them ideal for interacting with small objects and fine details. Bats are the masters of ultrasound. Flying through the night, they emit rapid pulses of high-frequency sound that bounce off insects, leaves, walls, and wires. By analyzing the returning echoes, bats build a three-dimensional representation of their surroundings. The short wavelengths of ultrasound allow them to detect tiny differences in distance and position, giving them resolution far beyond what lower frequency sounds could achieve. Dolphins and some whales perform similar feats in water, where sound travels faster and farther than in air. They produce intense ultrasonic clicks and listen for the echoes reflected from fish, seafloor features, and even the internal structures of other animals. Their brains are tuned to interpret these echoes with extraordinary precision, turning patterns of ultrasound into a rich sense of space. Humans, by comparison, are deaf to almost all of this. Our ears and cochlea are not built to respond to such rapid oscillations. The eardrum and ossicles cannot follow them efficiently, and the hair cells at the base of the cochlea lack the mechanical and biochemical agility to transduce them into neural signals. To us, most ultrasound is simply absent. Yet technology has opened a window onto this high-frequency world. Medical ultrasound uses pulses of very high-frequency sound sent into the body and reflected back from tissues and organs. The returning echoes are processed to create images revealing structures that cannot be seen directly. Industrial ultrasound tests materials for flaws, cleans delicate equipment, and measures distances and flows. In everyday environments, devices such as motion sensors, some pest repellents, and certain types of remote controls emit ultrasonic signals. Most of the time, we are unaware of these, though in some cases younger people, others with unusually extended high-frequency hearing, may sense faint, piercing sensations near such devices. Even then, the experience is often ambiguous, more of a discomfort than a clear tone. The fact that ultrasound can carry so much information, and that other animals use it so effectively, underscores how limited our hearing is in this region. There is an entire layer of acoustic detail, tiny clicks, squeaks, and echoes that we simply do not access without the instruments. Taken together, infrasound and ultrasound illustrate the thinness of the band within which human hearing operates. Below it lies the slow, rolling architecture of storms, oceans, and the earth itself. Above it lies the flickering, high-resolution activity of insects, bats, and technological pulses. All of it is real. All of it is vibration. But only the middle band, the one evolution and anatomy have selected for us, regularly enters our conscious experience as sound. The human hearing range, often quoted in textbooks 20 Hz to 20 kHz, belongs primarily to young, healthy individuals tested under ideal conditions. In real life, individual ranges vary, and almost everyone shrinks with time. The story of why humans cannot hear certain sounds is, for each person, not only about the species' design but also about a lifetime of use, damage, and change. From birth, the auditory system begins a long conversation with the world. Every sound that reaches the inner ear sets hair cells in motion, triggers neurotransmitter release, and sends volleys of action potentials into the brain. This activity is not free. Hair cells are delicate, and their capacity to withstand mechanical stress has limits. Very loud sounds, especially if sustained, can damage or destroy them. High-frequency hair cells, located near the base of the cochlea, are particularly vulnerable. They are the first to encounter incoming energy and the first to show signs of wear. Over years and decades, exposure to loud environments, music played at high volumes through headphones, industrial noise, traffic, explosions, even the cumulative effect of many moderately loud events gradually reduces the number and function. As these hair cells die or lose sensitivity, the upper limit of hearing declines. A child might hear tones at 18 or 20 kHz with ease. A middle-aged adult might barely detect 15 kHz, if at all. An older adult might struggle to hear frequencies above 8 or 10 kHz. The highest, brightest components of sound are certain overtones of instruments, the hiss of consonants like S and F, the fine texture of leaves rustling fade first. This process, called perspicuity when driven primarily by age, is not uniform. Genetics, health, noise exposure, and other factors shape its course. Some people experience significant hearing loss relatively early in life. Others maintain comparatively broad ranges well into old age. But the overall trend is the same. The window of audible frequencies narrows from the top down. Certain medications and illnesses can accelerate this decline. Ototoxic drugs, some antibiotics, chemotherapy agents, and high doses of certain painkillers can harm hair cells or the auditory nerve. Infections, circulatory problems, and metabolic disorders can also affect hearing. Each insult takes a piece from the available range. At the other end of the spectrum, very low frequencies can also become less perceptible. Changes in the stiffness of the middle ear damage to hair cells tuned to low frequencies, while broader neural issues can reduce sensitivity to base components. While most age-related loss occurs first at high frequencies, the entire band can shift and compress over time. Beyond the cochlea, changes occur in the auditory pathways of the brain. Neurons may lose some of their ability to synchronize precisely to incoming signals. Inhibitory circuits that help sharpen frequency tuning and suppress background noise can weaken. The result is not only a loss of certain frequencies, but also difficulty separating sound, following speech and noise, or perceiving subtle differences in timbre and location. The consequences of this shrinking window are both practical and emotional. Practically, speech becomes harder to understand, especially in noisy environments. Music loses some of its sparkle. Environmental sounds that once signaled subtle changes: a distant car approaching, a kettle just beginning to hiss, a bird's high, thin call may go unnoticed. Emotionally, there can be a sense of isolation, of being cut off from parts of the world that were once available. The inaudible becomes more crowded as more and more frequencies slip below or above personal thresholds. The category of sounds humans can't hear expands within a single lifetime, not because the world has changed, but because the individual's interface with it has. Technology offers partial bridges across these gaps. Hearing aids amplify certain frequencies, compress dynamic range, and attempt to restore audibility. Cochlear implants bypass damaged hair cells entirely, converting sound into electrical signals delivered directly to the auditory nerve. These devices, while transformative for many, do not perfectly replicate natural hearing, and they, too, are limited by the brain's capacity to interpret the signals they provide. Still, even with such assistance, there remain sounds that cannot be brought into awareness, not only those outside the original species range, but those lost to individual history. For each person, the map of inaudible sounds is unique, shaped by age, environment, and experience. Beyond the mechanics of ears and nose, another layer of filtering determines what you actually hear: the brain's own editing. Every second, even in a quiet room, the auditory nerve carries a stream of impulses to the brain. Some are responses to actual vibrations. Others represent spontaneous activity, the nervous system's own background noise. By the time this stream reaches consciousness, it has been filtered and sculpted many times. The pathway from ear to awareness passes through several relay stations. In the brainstem, incoming signals from the two ears are compared, allowing the system to compute differences in timing and intensity that help locate sounds in space. In the midbrain, patterns related to movement, novelty, and important environmental cues are enhanced. In the thalamus, information is further filtered before reaching the auditory cortex. At each stage, neurons respond selectively. Some are tuned to particular frequencies, others to particular directions or timing patterns. Many are sensitive to changes rather than steady states. They respond strongly to onsets, offsets, and modulations. This selectivity means that not every fluctuation in the auditory nerve produces a distinct change in brain activity, and not every change in brain activity reaches awareness. A key concept in auditory perception is masking. When two sounds are present at once, a louder one can make a softer one harder to hear, especially if they are close in frequency. For example, a loud engine rumble can hide the subtle creak of a chair. A strong vowel in speech can obscure a weaker consonant. In technical terms, the louder sound raises the effective threshold for detecting nearby frequencies, because the overlapping activation along the basal membrane and in the auditory pathways makes it difficult to distinguish the weaker signal. This masking does not depend only on the physical overlap of frequencies. The brain itself groups and segregates sounds into perceptual streams. It decides which fluctuations belong together as a single source and which belong to separate sources. When you listen to a friend in a noisy restaurant, your brain groups a voice into one stream and the background chatter into others, enhancing the former and suppressing the latter. As a result, many sounds that physically reach your ears, and even your auditory cortex, never emerge as distinct experiences. They are either folded into other streams, treated as part of the background, or ignored entirely. They become part of an acoustic wallpaper against which more salient patterns stand out. Attention further narrows what you actually hear. When you focus on a particular sound, a piece of music, a voice, a dripping faucet, neuronal activity related to that sound increases, while activity related to competing sounds decreases. This selective enhancement happens both in the cortex and in earlier stages of the auditory pathway, influenced by feedback signals from higher brain regions. In a sense, attention acts as a second, more flexible filter layered on top of the fixed mechanical and neural limits of your hearing apparatus. It can make faint sounds more noticeable and loud sounds less intrusive, depending on what you are trying to do. But it can also render some sounds effectively inaudible. A clock ticking in your room may fade from awareness as your brain decides it carries no new information. A refrigerator cycling on and off becomes part of the unnoticed background hum. Under conditions of intense concentration or drowsiness, this filtering becomes even stronger. The brain downregulates responsiveness to external stimuli, prioritizing internal processes, thoughts, memories, or the onset of sleep. Sounds that would easily catch your attention during the day may go completely unnoticed as your state shifts. There is also a limit to how much information consciousness can handle at once. The auditory system can process multiple streams in parallel at early stages, but awareness can only track a few at a time. When too many sounds compete, some must be relegated to the margins. They are still present in the neural signals, but the brain does not allocate the resources needed to bring them into the foreground. In this way, there are two kinds of sounds humans cannot hear. The first are those defined by the physics and biology of the ear and auditory nerve, infrasound and ultrasound, and any frequency too faint or too brief to move the relevant structures enough to trigger neural firing. The second are those defined by the brain's own priorities, sounds that enter the ear and even the cortex but are edited out by masking, grouping, and attention. The boundary between these categories is not sharp. Some low-level neural activity never becomes sound in the psychological sense. Some masked sounds can be heard if attention is specifically directed to them, as when a musician learns to pick out an inner line in a complex chord. Some sounds that are technically within hearing range can be rendered effectively inaudible by expectations and context. Expectations themselves shape hearing. The brain uses prior knowledge to interpret ambiguous input. If you expect silence, you may fail to notice faint sounds that do not fit that expectation. If you expect noise, you may hear patterns, voices, music, knocks and random fluctuations, a phenomenon called pareidolia. These top-down influences can either expand or contract the set of sounds you experience. Cultural and linguistic factors also contour the world of heard versus unheard. Speakers of different languages are attuned to different sets of phonetic contrasts. A sound distinction that is crucial in one language may be ignored in another, with the brain learning to treat certain variations as irrelevant. Musicians, through training, become sensitive to pitch and timbre differences that non-musicians overlook. In each case, what counts as a distinct sound depends on learned patterns of attention and categorization. When you close your eyes and let your mind wander, the stream of internal experience continues even in the absence of external sound. You might recall a melody, imagine a voice, or drift through wordless impressions. The auditory cortex participates in these internal simulations, blurring the line between hearing and imagining. Meanwhile, the ears continue to send signals, but many of them are ignored. The world keeps vibrating, the brain attends elsewhere. At night, as you fall asleep, this internal-external balance shifts again. Certain sounds, a sudden loud noise, a baby's cry, your own name can still pierce the boundary and rouse you. Others fade completely, absorbed into dreams or drowned in the brain's shifting activity. The auditory system remains physically capable of transducing vibrations, but the pathways to consciousness close most of the time. From this perspective, the phrase "humans can't hear certain sounds" acquires another layer of meaning. It is not only that some frequencies never make it past the mechanics of the ear, or that some intensities never cross neural thresholds. It is also that the brain chooses, moment by moment, which portion of the available acoustic information to elevate into awareness and which to let pass by unnoticed. We live, then, inside a partial soundscape. Our ears emit only a band of frequencies, and within that band, only some patterns become meaningfully heard. The rest belongs to the vast inaudible, vibrations too slow or too fast, too faint or too masked, too peripheral to the brain's current concerns. Technology has, in the last century, given us glimpses beyond these edges. Microphones record frequencies beyond those we can hear, revealing the ultrasonic components of bird calls or the infrasonic pulses of distant machinery. Spectrograms display sound as patterns across frequency and time, showing that even a simple noise often contains a rich structure extending above and below the narrow strip we perceive. Accelerometers and seismometers detect vibrations in buildings and the ground, mapping the infrasound landscape of storms, ocean waves, and human activity. Specialized transducers convert ultrasound into images, letting us receive with high-frequency sound in ways reminiscent of bats and dolphins. Computer algorithms can shift frequencies into the audible range, translating otherwise silent events into sounds we can hear. These tools demonstrate that the world is always more acoustically complex than it seems. A quiet forest at night is full of high and low frequency sounds beyond our reach. A city street hums not only with traffic noise but with ultrasonic emissions from security systems and motion detectors, infrasound from trains and heavy vehicles, and countless mid-frequency details that our ears could capture but our brains ignore. Recognizing this can bring a kind of gentle humility. The soundscape you experience is not the soundscape. It is one slice carved out by anatomy, evolution, and attention. Other creatures share the same physical space but inhabit very different acoustic worlds tuned to the frequencies and patterns that matter to them. Machines and instruments further multiply the possible ways of inhabiting this vibratory reality. In daily life, you do not need to hold all of this in mind. It is enough, most of the time, to hear what you hear and act accordingly. But in quiet moments, especially as you prepare for sleep, there can be something soothing in remembering that the apparent silence around you is not an emptiness but a limited boundary beyond which countless subtle motions continue, unregistered. The fact that you cannot hear certain sounds does not mean they are unimportant. Some, like the infrasound of an approaching storm, ultimately affect you through other senses and systems. Others, like the ultrasounds used in medical imaging, shape your life indirectly through knowledge and technology. Still others remain forever outside your personal story, part of the background processes of a planet and universe that teem with motion at all scales. When you lie down and the room grows quiet, you may notice the remaining sounds more clearly: the faint rush of air, the distant rumble of a car, the subtle creaks of a settling building, the rhythm of your own breathing. These are the vibrations that happen to fall within your current window of audibility and attention. They are enough to anchor you in the present moment, even as you remember that much more is happening just beyond your reach. In the end, the question of why humans cannot hear certain sounds resolves into a simple, lay answer. Physics supplies an endless continuum of possible vibrations. Biology builds ears and brains that can handle only a section of that continuum, tuned via evolution to the demands of survival and communication. Individual history further narrows that section through age and experience. The brain's own filters narrow it still more, selecting a handful of patterns to present as the seamless experience you call hearing. What remains outside the handful is not nothing. It is the inaudible music of the world, the slow pulse of infrasound, the quick shimmer of ultrasound, the murmurs masked by louder events, the whispers overlooked by a mind turned inward. As you drift towards sleep, you can let this understanding settle over you like a soft blanket. The apparent quiet in the room is not a void, but a sign of how your senses and brain are protecting you, simplifying the world so that you can rest. Beyond the faint sounds you still perceive, the earth turns, air moves, distant storms breathe, machines hum, animals call in frequencies you will never hear. You do not need to hear all of this to belong to it. You are already part of the same continuous physical reality, whether or not its every vibration becomes a conscious sound. Your body resonates with some of these waves, your environment carries them, your technologies detect them. They are there, and you are in them, even as your awareness narrows to a quiet band. Why can humans not hear certain sounds? Because no creature can sense everything. Because perception is always a compromise between richness and simplicity, between information and rest. Because nature has tuned you to a narrow, useful band and left the rest to be felt indirectly, measured with instruments, or simply ignored. In that narrow band, there's already more than enough: the warmth of a familiar voice, the softness of rain on a roof, the distant rumble of thunder, the rustle of leaves, the heartbeat in your own chest. These are the sounds that accompany you into sleep. Beyond them, the inaudible world continues, indifferent to your awareness, but not separate from you. You float in its unseen, unheard currents, cradled by vibrations you do not hear and by the small, precious ones you do. Between them lies the quiet in which you can finally rest. There is another way to appreciate how narrow our hearing band is by considering the full continuum of frequencies and how differently they behave. Imagine sweeping slowly from the slowest possible oscillations up to the fastest. At ultra-low frequencies, cycles take minutes, hours, or longer. Pressure rises and falls so gradually that even delicate instruments struggle to distinguish the variation from simple changes in weather or altitude. These are more like tides than waves, slow modulations that can subtly stress structures or interact with large-scale motions of air and water. Humans do not experience such fluctuations as sound. At most, we notice them as changes in environment. As frequency increases, cycles shorten into seconds and fractions of seconds. In this range, the vibrations begin to overlap with the mechanical resonances of large structures, bridges, skyscrapers, long spans of cable. Engineers pay careful attention here because when the frequency of external forces matches the natural frequency of a structure, resonance can amplify motion dramatically. The famous collapse of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, though influenced by aerodynamic effects, illustrates how periodic forces can extract large motions from seemingly small inputs. Still higher, as we approach the lower edge of human hearing, we enter a region where vibrations become fast enough that the ear can, in principle, respond to them as sound. Below about 20 Hz, you may feel heavy bass notes more in your chest than in your ears, a combination of low-frequency air pressure changes and vibrations transmitted through the body. At the threshold, perception is ambiguous. Is it sound, or is it motion? Only as the frequency climbs further do most people begin to hear a definite pitch. Between about 20 Hz and a few hundred Hz lie many of the fundamental frequencies of speech and music. The lowest notes of a piano, the deep tones of a cello or bass, the basic pitch of most adult voices all fall here. These frequencies give sounds their sense of body and warmth. They are also where room resonances and standing waves can strongly color what you hear, making some notes boom and others vanish depending on where you sit. Above this, from a few hundred Hz to a few kilohertz, lie the frequencies where human hearing is most sensitive. This is where much of the information in speech resides, especially the 4 immense clusters of energy that define vowel sounds. The ear and auditory system devote disproportionate resources to this range. Equal loudness curves, which show how intense tones at different frequencies must be to sound equally loud, dip lowest here, indicating peak sensitivity. Higher still, from several kilohertz up toward the upper limit of hearing, reside the harmonics and overtones that give sounds their brightness and clarity. The hiss of consonants, the brilliance of a violin's upper register, the airy components of a singer's voice all depend on these higher frequencies. As age or damage trims this region, sounds can begin to seem muffled or dull, even if their overall volume remains similar. Beyond the upper limit of hearing, cycles become so rapid that they slip entirely past our awareness. Yet physically, there is nothing special about this boundary. Air and other media can carry higher frequency vibrations, and many objects and processes naturally generate them. Our inability to hear them reflects not a gap in reality, but a gap in our equipment. Room acoustics offers another way to glimpse our limitations. In a concert hall, reflections from walls, ceiling, and floor blend with direct sound to create reverberation. This reverberation enriches music, but only if its timing and frequency characteristics match human hearing. Designers therefore consider reverberation times in specific bands, often centered on frequencies crucial for speech and music. Infrasound reverberates in ways we rarely perceive as such, shaping the feel of a space more than its sound. Ultrasound reflections are likewise lost to our ears, though microphones might pick them up. The technologies used to measure and analyze sound have no such subjective boundaries. Microphones with flat responses over broad ranges, vibration sensors attached to surfaces, laser vibrometers that detect microscopic movements all reveal that the world's acoustic activity extends smoothly beyond human hearing. Spectral plots show energy rising and falling across frequencies we cannot sense, proof that the inaudible is not hypothetical but always present. From the perspective of physics, there is nothing privileged about the human band of audibility. It is one slice among many. From the perspective of experience, however, it is everything, the band within which vibrations become part of your conscious world. If you could step briefly into another creature's acoustic perspective, the world would change dramatically. Imagine, for a moment, hearing like a bat. The quiet of night would vanish, replaced by a dense tapestry of rapid clicks and fine-grained echoes. Every surface would sing back its distance and texture. Insects would sparkle acoustically against the background of leaves and branches. What you now perceive as silence between occasional nocturnal sounds would fill with an almost overwhelming richness of high-frequency detail. Or imagine hearing like an elephant. The landscape would be threaded with slow, powerful rumbles, some from individuals miles away. Each long, low call would carry information about identity, emotional state, and intention. The ground beneath your feet would be an instrument, conducting vibrations from distant events. The human voices around you might sound thin and insubstantial by comparison. The higher pitches riding atop a river of low frequencies you feel more than hear. These thought experiments underscore that certain sounds humans cannot hear are, for other species, central to life. Our inaudible is their primary channel. What is peripheral or non-existent in our soundscape can be a dominant, information-rich layer in theirs. Technology can simulate a fraction of this shift. Recordings made with wideband microphones can be slowed down to bring ultrasound into the human range, revealing the intricate structure of bird songs, insect calls, or bat echolocation signals. When played back at a lower speed, these once invisible phrases become audible melodies and patterns, each note originally too fast for us now stretched into our temporal comfort zone. Similarly, infrasound can be sped up or translated into a higher band. The deep, long waves of storms or distant explosions, inaudible in real time, become audible ripples when compressed in time or shifted in frequency. These transformations are artificial. They do not change what we can hear unaided, but they offer a reminder that hearing is a matter of mapping vibrations into a particular band, and that this mapping can be altered by tools. In quiet reflection, you might think of your hearing as one tuning of a vast, many-stringed instrument. Evolution set the tension on those strings to favor certain frequencies, and your personal history has adjusted them further. The world plays across all strings, but you hear clearly only those whose vibrations your instrument supports. Recognizing this does not diminish the value of the hearing you have. Instead, it can make each heard sound feel more precious. The squeak of a door, the rumble of a train, the whisper of wind through trees, the murmur of a loved one's voice, these lie within a window that could have been shaped differently, or not at all. That they exist for you at all is the result of countless contingencies in physics and biology. As you consider the sounds you cannot hear, it may be comforting to remember that you are not missing a separate world sealed away from you. You are instead participating in that world through one of many possible channels. Other creatures, other technologies, other perspectives sample different parts of the same underlying reality. Your slice is narrow, but it is coherent and meaningful, a band in which you can live and rest. In the dimness before sleep, when external sounds grow softer and your attention turns inward, the band can narrow further. The refrigerator cycles off, traffic dwindles, the house creaks and then is still. Your own breathing becomes the dominant rhythm. Outside this small circle of awareness, vibrations continue, pipes groaning, distant engines idling, the faint rush of wind higher in the atmosphere, but the brain allows them to recede. It is in these moments that the idea of inaudible sound becomes especially gentle. Rather than an absence, it is a fullness withheld, a background richness that you do not need to confront. The world vibrates, but your senses and your brain permit you to experience a curated fragment, enough to feel held in place without being overwhelmed. You might picture your hearing as a lantern in a dark, resonant space. The lantern's beam illuminates only a limited area, leaving the rest in shadow. The space does not end where the light fades, it extends indefinitely. But for you, here and now, the lit area is sufficient. You do not need to see or hear every corner to feel that you are somewhere real. The same is true of sound. The frequencies you cannot hear, whether low or higher, too faint or masked, are part of the larger acoustic architecture in which you live. They shape the behavior of animals and machines, the design of buildings, the dynamics of weather, the patterns of the earth. They sometimes brush against your body or mind in ways you barely notice. They almost never step forward as distinct experiences. In accepting this, you accept a basic truth about all perception: it is partial. The eye sees only a sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum. The skin feels only a range of pressures and temperatures. The nose and tongue detect only some of the countless chemicals that flow through air and water. Each sense is defined as much by what it excludes as by what it includes. Why humans cannot hear certain sounds is thus not a mystery to be solved once and for all, but a doorway into understanding what it means to sense anything at all. It is a reminder that your experience of the world is always filtered, tuned, and simplified. That simplification is not a flaw but a necessity, allowing a finite brain to navigate an infinite riches without being lost. If you wish, you could fill your waking hours chasing the unseen and unheard, using instruments and theories to expand your model of the world. Many scientists and engineers do exactly that, and their work has given us extraordinary insight into the hidden realms of vibration. But at night, as you lie down, it is enough to let the narrowness of your hearing be a kind of kindness. The sounds that remain you breathing, faint hum, and occasional distant noise are more than enough to remind you that you are here, that you inhabit a living, moving world. Beyond them, the inaudible vibrations continue unfurling across frequencies and distances that you will never directly know. You are, nonetheless, carried by them, by the gravitational flexing of the ground, by atmospheric tides, by the ceaseless small motions of matter and energy. In this sense, every human is like a sleeper in a house full of quiet activity. Pipes expand and contract, beams settle, appliances click and hum, distant traffic comes and goes. The sleeper hears little of it and needs to hear little. The house holds them regardless. The world, with all its unheard sounds, holds you in the same way. If you were to map your own hearing in detail, you would discover that even within the nominal species range, sensitivity is uneven. Audiologists do this with audiograms, charts that show the quietest sounds you can detect at various frequencies. During a hearing test, tones at different pitches are played through headphones, starting very soft and gradually increasing until you signal that you hear them. The threshold at each frequency is plotted, revealing a curve. In an ideally young, undamaged ear, this curve dips lowest, indicating greatest sensitivity in the mid-frequencies, roughly between 1 and 4 kHz. These are the regions most important for understanding speech. At very low and very high frequencies, the curve rises, meaning louder sounds are needed for detection. The practical effect is that even within the 20 Hz to 20 kHz band, there are regions where your hearing is effectively narrower. Noise-induced hearing loss often leaves characteristic notches in this curve, especially around 3 to 6 kHz, where prolonged exposure to loud sounds can selectively damage hair cells. Someone who has spent years in loud work environments or listening to high-volume music may show a distinct dip in sensitivity there, even if the thresholds at low and high frequencies look relatively normal. On an everyday level, this might manifest as difficulty understanding speech in noisy settings or perceiving certain consonants. These details matter because they illustrate how the category of sounds you cannot hear is not only about the extreme ends of the spectrum. It includes all the frequencies and intensities that fall below your personal threshold curve at any given moment. A soft whisper at 10 kHz might be inaudible to one person and clear to another. A low-frequency hum might be noticed by someone with particularly sensitive ears and ignored by someone else. The brain's own dynamic adjustments further complicate this picture. When you move from a noisy environment into a quiet one, your auditory system gradually increases its gain, becoming more sensitive. Conversely, in a loud environment, it reduces gain to protect itself and maintain some working range. These automatic changes mean that the same physical sound can be audible in one context and inaudible in another, even for the same person. Psychoacoustics, the study of how we perceive sound, has documented many such context-dependent effects. For example, a faint tone that is easily heard in silence may disappear entirely when a slightly louder noise at a nearby frequency is present. This is frequency masking. Temporal masking occurs when a loud sound makes it harder to hear another sound that occurs shortly before or after it. In both cases, the second sound reaches the ear and cochlea, but its neural representation is overshadowed by the first. Critical bands frequency ranges within which sounds strongly interact also shape what we hear. If two tones fall within the same critical band, they can mask each other more effectively than if they are separated. Our perception of loudness, pitch, and timbre depends on how energy is distributed across and within these bands. The net result is that the effective resolution of hearing is limited not only by outer and inner ear mechanics but also by how the brain passes frequency space. Illusions reveal these limits in vivid ways. The missing fundamental illusion, for instance, shows that the brain can infer a pitch from a pattern of harmonics even when the lowest frequency component is absent. In such cases, you hear a pitch that is not physically present. Conversely, in certain complex sounds, components that are physically present go unheard as distinct elements because the brain groups them into a single percept. In both scenarios, the relationship between vibration and experience is indirect and mediated. From the vantage point of these findings, the set of sounds you cannot hear becomes highly nuanced. Some are beyond the range of your sensory hardware. Some are below your personal thresholds because of age, damage, or individual variation. Some are masked or grouped away by the brain's preprocessing. Some are replaced by inferences or illusions that override the raw input. Designers of alarms, notification sounds, and auditory interfaces take these complexities into account, often without naming them. An effective alarm must be audible above background noise, fall within frequencies where human hearing is strong, and avoid being too close to common environmental sounds. It must also be neither so low that many speakers cannot reproduce it clearly, nor so high that older listeners cannot hear it. In practice, this means clustering important signals in a part of the spectrum where most people retain good sensitivity. Architects and acoustic engineers likewise shape spaces with human hearing in mind. Concert halls, lecture rooms, and even train stations are designed to support clarity in the mid and high frequencies important for speech and music, while controlling excessive reverberation that would smear those sounds over time. They may also incorporate materials and structures that damp low-frequency rumble or reduce the intrusion of external noise. All of this tuning assumes and exploits the known contours of human hearing. In domestic and work environments, regulations about noise exposure focus primarily on the audible range, especially frequencies where hearing is most vulnerable and most critical for communication. Infrasound and ultrasound are often ignored unless they reach levels that cause physical harm or significant discomfort. This reflects both the relative scarcity of well-documented health effects at moderate levels and the practical difficulty of regulating sounds most people cannot consciously detect. Yet as measurement tools become more sensitive and widely available, society's awareness of inaudible sounds has grown. Residents near wind farms, for example, have raised concerns about low-frequency and infrasonic noise. While scientific studies often find levels below established safety thresholds, the subjective experience of such environments can be complex, influenced by expectations, visual cues, and individual sensitivity. In urban settings, researchers have begun to map soundscapes across broader frequency bands, capturing not only the audible but also the infra and ultrasonic components of city life. Such maps show that even places we think of as quiet are rarely acoustically empty. Instead, they are dominated by low-level, wideband noise from distant traffic, HVAC systems, and other infrastructure, layered under the occasional discrete sounds we actually notice. All of this points back to a central theme: your hearing is a particular compromise struck by nature and refined by culture and technology. It opened enough of the vibratory world to keep you safe, connected, and informed, without drowning you in detail. The sounds you cannot hear are not hairs in this design, but boundaries that make perception manageable. If these boundaries were suddenly removed and you could hear everything from the slowest infrasound to the highest ultrasound, at all intensities, you would likely find the experience intolerable. The constant rumble of the planet, the ceaseless chatter of microscopic impacts, the harsh hiss of thermal motion at high frequencies, the overlapping calls of countless creatures and machines across the spectrum all would compete for your attention. Sleep would be elusive. Focus would be rare. Instead, you inhabit a curated soundscape. It can be noisy and overwhelming at times, but it is modest compared to what exists. Within it, you can still find pockets of quiet moments when external sound drops low enough that internal processes rise to the surface. In those moments, you might hear your own heartbeat, the slight crackle of joints as you move, the rustle of fabric, the faint sound of air in your nose and throat. These subtle, intimate sounds fall squarely within the human band. They are reminders that, while you cannot hear everything, you can hear enough to be aware of yourself as a living, breathing body in a larger, moving world. They are also reminders that sound, for you, is always anchored to a perspective. Someone standing next to you hears a slightly different mix of vibrations shaped by their own anatomy and attention. A bird perched above you hears another mix. A bat flying overhead hears a version of the same moment full of rapid clicks and echoes. Instruments placed around you record yet other versions, some of which no ear could ever directly experience. In this layer of reality, your hearing is one thread among many. Asking why you cannot hear certain sounds is, in part, asking why your thread looks the way it does. The answers about physics, biology, evolution, and cognition are specific and technical, but they also lead to a wider reflection on what it is to inhabit a finite mind and body inside an infinite, vibrating universe. As you settle into stillness and let your eyes close, you can allow these reflections to drift into the background, just as so many sounds do. The refrigerator may hum, a car may pass, a distant voice may rise and fall. You do not need to analyze these. You do not need to imagine the infrasound beneath them or the ultrasound above. The act of knowing that such sounds exist, and that you are always surrounded by more than you perceive, can itself be enough. Your hearing has carried you through another day, warning you of approaching footsteps, enriching your experiences with music and speech, anchoring you in place with the familiar textures of your environment. It will continue to work quietly as you sleep, alert enough to wake you if something truly important happens, but otherwise content to let most vibrations pass by. Outside the narrow band of audibility, the world's other sounds will continue their indifferent dance. Winds will sweep across landscapes, generating low-frequency waves. Small creatures will communicate at pitches you will never know without machines. Distant machinery will thrum. Structures will resonate. Even in deep space, where no air carries sound, vibrations in plasmas and matter fields will propagate in their own ways. You will not hear these things, and you do not need to. Your life unfolds within a carefully limited soundscape, and in that limitation there is safety, clarity, and room to rest. Consider for a moment the specific case of environment shaped around human hearing. Cities are not only visual but acoustic constructions. Traffic lights, crosswalk signals, train arrivals, emergency vehicles, and countless other systems rely on sound to convey information quickly to people who might not be looking in the right direction. The pitch and pattern of these sounds are chosen with our hearing range and sensitivity in mind. Sirens sweep through frequencies where human ears, even older or partially impaired ones, are relatively sensitive. Their oscillations in pitch and amplitude are designed to cut through background noise and to resist masking by common environmental sounds. A siren composed mostly of infrasound or ultrasound would be physically possible but practically useless. Few would consciously register it, and those who did might experience only discomfort or vague unease rather than a clear signal. Similarly, the quiet beeps of household appliances, the chimes of smartphones, and the tones of doorbells are crafted to fall within bands that stand out against typical home noise. Designers know, implicitly or explicitly, that certain frequency regions are more likely to be heard at low volumes, more likely to carry through walls, and less likely to be swallowed by the hum of ventilation or refrigeration. Public spaces use sound to create atmospheres as well. Background music in shops is often tailored to be audible but not intrusive, staying within ranges that most customers can hear easily while avoiding excessive energy at frequencies that might fatigue or irritate. In some cases, high-frequency tones have been used to discourage loitering by younger people, exploiting the age-related decline in sensitivity so that adults remain largely unaware. These practices, while controversial, again illustrate how knowledge of what humans can and cannot hear is woven into the fabric of everyday life. Noise regulations and standards, too, are grounded in human hearing limits. Decibel scales are weighted, often using the weighting curve to reflect the frequencies where our ears are most sensitive. Measurements of environmental noise, workplace exposure, and product sound emissions are frequently reported in dBA, which emphasizes very low and very high frequencies. This does not mean those frequencies are absent, only that the metrics are tuned to approximate perceived loudness and potential hearing damage risk for an average human listener. In this way, society as a whole operates within a shared, assumed band of hearing. The infrastructure, warnings, comforts, and constraints of daily life are built around it. Sounds outside this band rarely enter into planning, except in specialized contexts like structural engineering, seismology, or ultrasound-based technologies. At the same time, there are growing movements to reconsider our relationship with sound, both heard and unheard. The concept of a soundscape emphasizes that the acoustic environment is not just noise or information, but an aspect of our habitat that can support or undermine well-being. Efforts to create quieter, more restorative urban spaces implicitly acknowledge that even within our heard band, too much or the wrong kind of sound is harmful. The unheard portions of the spectrum infrared and ultrasonic enter these discussions more slowly, often through scientific studies that link certain vibration patterns to stress responses in animals or potential effects on humans. While much remains uncertain, the mere fact that inaudible vibrations can have physiological consequences reminds us that hearing is only one way in which sound interacts with life. From a contemplative standpoint, this interplay between heard and unheard, conscious and unconscious, external and internal, can become a motif. The world's vibrations are continuous, but your experience samples them discreetly. Between each sample lies an interval of unregistered activity. Between the sounds you notice lie stretches of vibration you do not. You can use this motif as a kind of mental image. Picture all sound as a vast river, flowing endlessly across frequencies and time. Your hearing is a small set of channels dipping into that river, drawing off streams that your ear and brain can handle. Everything else continues to flow past. Sometimes the channels widen a little, as when you focus intently in a quiet room. Sometimes they narrow, as when you are tired or distracted. The river itself does not change because of your channels, but your experience of it does. Science has given us tools to measure the river more fully, to map its currents and eddies beyond our native range. But the basic fact remains: you will never hear all of it, nor do you need to. If this realization feels disconcerting at first, thinking of all that is happening beyond your senses, it can, with time, become calming. There is relief in knowing that your brain and body are not obligated to register every flicker of change in the environment. They have, over millions of years, learned to ignore most of it, to let it pass by unremarked, so that you can focus on what matters for your particular life. When you stand in a field and hear only wind and distant birds, it is enough. The infrasound of that wind, the ultrasound of small insects flying near you, the low rumbles of distant machinery carried through the ground all continue without demanding a place in consciousness. They form a background against which a few select sounds rise. When you sit in a room and hear only the faintest hums and creaks, it is enough. The inaudible vibrations of passing trucks, the subtle resonances of the building's frame, the ultrasonic emissions of electronic devices all occur without requiring your attention. In practice, living inside a partial soundscape is not a deprivation but a condition of possibility. Without it, you could not act effectively or rest deeply. The sounds humans cannot hear are part of the world's constant motion, and not hearing them is part of your ability to inhabit that world as a finite, embodied being. As you think back over this journey from the physics of sound to the biology of the ear, from evolution's tuning to the deep murmur of infrasound and the quick whispers of ultrasound, from aging and damage to perception and attention, you may notice a pattern. At each stage, constraints appear. Mechanical constraints in the ear. Cellular and neural constraints in transduction and coding. Evolutionary constraints in what is worth sensing. Cognitive constraints in what is worth noticing. Each constraint narrows the field of potential experience, but each also makes that experience more usable. The sounds you can hear are those that have made it through all these filters. They are, in a sense, selected by physics and history to be compatible with your life. You might never know the exact shape of your own hearing range at every moment. It shifts subtly with health, fatigue, and context, but you can trust that it will continue to do its quiet work, catching what needs to be caught and letting the rest go. In quiet moments, you can also, if you wish, imagine what lies beyond its edges. Not to chase it anxiously, but to appreciate the intricate tuning that lets you exist at all in a world too vast to be taken in whole. To make these ideas more concrete, you might imagine a single day traced not only through what you hear, but through what you do not. In the early morning, before you wake, infrasound from distant weather systems is already pressing softly against the walls of your home. The long, slow waves generated by air masses shifting far away arrive and pass with no announcement in your conscious mind. If you had the right instruments, you could see them as gentle undulations on a graph, each crest and trough corresponding to subtle pressure changes in the air. Your body feels them on some level, as part of the background of physical forces acting on it, but they do not rise to the level of sound. Closer by, inside the building, structural components creak and settle as temperatures change. Some of these motions produce audible clicks and pops. Others produce only low-frequency vibrations that are below your hearing threshold. Pipes expand imperceptibly as hot water begins to flow somewhere in the system. Elevators in the distance start moving. The motors and cables generate a spectrum of vibration, some of which your ears could capture if conditions were right, much of which passes unheard. When your alarm sounds, it does so in a carefully chosen band, loud enough and high enough to cut through surrounding noise, but not so high or low as to fall outside your range. You awaken not because every vibration in the environment has changed, but because one particular pattern has been engineered to intersect the band where your hearing is strongest and your brain is most ready to respond. As you step outside, the world greets you with the familiar sounds of your neighborhood: birds, vehicles, footsteps, human voices. Underneath this, though, the ground transmits low-frequency tremors from traffic on distant roads, from trains passing under the city, from construction sites blocks away. These vibrations blend into a continuous, low rumble that your hearing apparatus mostly discards. You may only become aware of them if something changes suddenly: a heavy truck passing unusually close, a train emerging from a tunnel. High above, perhaps, a bat finishes its night's hunt, its ultrasonic calls tracing a scene you cannot access. The details of leaves, branches, and insects encoded in rapid echoes never reach you. Later in the day, certain electronic devices in offices or shops may emit faint high-frequency noises as components switch rapidly on and off. Some people, especially younger ones, may notice a barely perceptible whine near such devices. Others, with narrow hearing or more distraction, remain oblivious. In a cafe, your ears emit a chaotic mix of sounds: espresso machines hissing, dishes clinking, conversations overlapping, music playing softly overhead. Yet your experience is far more organized than the raw acoustic scene. You follow one voice more than others, or let your attention rest on the music. The many other sounds, though they reach your ears and activate your auditory pathways, are relegated to the periphery. They become part of an undifferentiated hum. Within this hum, there may be frequencies you no longer hear at all, even if your younger self would have. The highest overtones of the music, the faint hiss from a speaker, the delicate chime of dishes in a range above your threshold, all are effectively removed. The soundtrack of your day is thus not only a function of external events, but of your current hearing profile. On a busy street, traffic noise masks much else. Car engines and tire noise, largely concentrated in low and mid frequencies, raise the effective hearing threshold across broad bands. Birds still call from trees and wires, but some of their softer, higher notes vanish beneath the roar. Your ability to notice them depends on their loudness, their proximity, and how much your brain chooses to prioritize them over the ever-present road noise. If you were able to flip the masking off, as one might mute a track in a recording, you would suddenly find that the world is denser with sound than it previously seemed. Yet even then, much of that density would lie outside your personal band, in frequencies never admitted by your ears. In the evening, perhaps you listen to music through headphones. The recording, made with professional microphones and equipment, captures a wider frequency range than you can hear. Engineers may have shaped the spectrum to fit a typical human hearing, boosting or cutting certain bands. Your headphones have their own response curve, emphasizing some frequencies and attenuating others. The final result is a carefully curated slice of the full acoustic event, tailored to your species and, to some extent, to your culture. Late at night, when you finally turn everything off, the remaining sounds may seem to swell for a moment. A house that felt silent now reveals distant fans, the faint rush of air in ducts, the ticking of cooling metal, the occasional crack from the structure. Your sensitivity increases as overall levels drop, and your brain briefly widens its aperture to admit more of what is left. Even so, the inaudible still far outweighs the audible. By the time you fall asleep, your auditory system has processed an immense amount of information during the day. Most of it never became conscious experience. It was used briefly for orientation, filtered for relevance, and then allowed to fade. The sounds you did not hear, either because they lay outside your physical range or because your brain chose not to promote them, vastly outnumber those you did. In this way, a single day reflects all the themes we have explored. The universe of possible vibrations is immense. Human hearing carves from it a narrow, shifting band defined by physics, biology, and attention. Within that band, experience is further refined by learning, context, and need. Thinking about all this, you might be tempted to imagine that some beings, natural or artificial, could transcend these limits and hear everything. Even if such beings existed, however, they would face the same fundamental problem of finite capacity to process information in an effectively infinite field. They, too, would need to filter, to prioritize, to ignore. Their version of a cannot hear certain sounds would look different from yours, but it would exist. In the end, the fact that you cannot hear certain sounds is a specific expression of a universal constraint. No perspective can grasp the whole of reality at once. Every way of sensing brings some aspects into focus and leaves others in shadow. Your hearing, with its gaps at low and high frequencies and its context-dependent thresholds, is one such way. It has served countless generations of humans, letting them hear danger and opportunity, speech and music within wildlife. It can also, when circumstances allow, create the quiet that lets you rest. As you lie down, perhaps you can hear your own breathing, the faint rustle of fabric, a distant car. Perhaps you hear even less. In either case, you're surrounded by more vibration than you will ever know. The earth's deep murmurs, the high-frequency flicker of tiny events, the constant interplay of mechanical and natural sounds all continue whether you attend to them or not. You are allowed, in this moment, to let them go. The sounds you cannot hear do not require your vigilance. The systems that need to monitor the environment during sleep reflexes, subcortical pathways, basic arousal mechanisms will do so. The rest can fade into a darkness not of absence but of unawareness. Between the vibrations that reach you and the few that become part of your experience, there is a long chain of selection and transformation. Understanding that change does not change the sounds themselves, but it can change how you relate to them. It can replace the feeling of missing out with a sense of participating gracefully in a world that is, by necessity, always more than you can perceive. There is one more dimension to the story of unheard sounds, those that originate within your own body. When you speak, you hear your voice not only through air conduction, sound traveling from your mouth to your ears through the air, but also through bone conduction, vibrations conducted through the bones of your skull directly to the cochlea. These internally conducted vibrations include more low-frequency energy than the sound that reaches someone standing in front of you. As a result, your voice sounds richer and deeper to you than it does on a recording played back through speakers or headphones. A recording reveals how other people hear you, filtered only by air conduction and their own hearing profiles. The discrepancy between that sound and your internal experience can be surprising, even unsettling. It is a reminder that even when the source is your own body, your perception is only one version of the full vibratory event. Other internal sounds are mostly kept from conscious awareness. Your heart beats, blood courses through vessels, joints move, muscles shift, digestive organs work. All of these processes generate vibrations. Some of them reach the inner ear via bone conduction. Under certain conditions, lying very still in a quiet room, or when external sound is heavily attenuated, you may hear your heartbeat as a soft thump or whoosh. You might notice the faint crackle of joints or the gurgle of the stomach. In everyday life, though, the brain tends to suppress these internal signals, treating them as uninformative noise. Through development and learning, it distinguishes between self-generated and external sounds, dampening the former so that the latter can stand out. This suppression is part of why you do not constantly hear the internal workings of your body as an intrusive soundtrack. Sometimes, when these filters falter or when specific internal sounds become abnormally strong, awareness of them can be distressing. People with certain medical conditions become acutely aware of their own heartbeat in the ear, a condition known as pulsatile tinnitus. Others develop continuous perceptions of tones or noises, tinnitus more generally without any corresponding external sound. Tinnitus is a complex phenomenon, often arising after hearing loss or other damage to the auditory system. When input from certain frequencies diminishes, the brain may respond by increasing its internal gain or by reorganizing neural circuits. In some cases, this reorganization produces ongoing activity that the brain interprets as sound, even in silence. The perceived pitch of tinnitus often corresponds to frequencies where hearing loss is greatest, suggesting a link between missing external input and internally generated noise. For those who experience it, tinnitus is a vivid illustration of how sound, as an experience, is not identical to sound as a physical vibration. Here, there is hearing without external waves. Conversely, in the many examples we have explored where vibrations exist but go unheard, there are waves without hearing. Between these extremes lies the usual case, where physical vibration and perception are aligned closely enough that we treat them as one. Thinking about tinnitus can deepen appreciation of the quiet many people take for granted. When you lie in bed and hear nothing but the faintest environmental sounds, that absence of internal noise is itself a kind of gift, an opening in which external vibrations can gently fade and the mind can rest. If a soft ringing or roaring is present instead, the boundary between heard and unheard shifts yet again, and the category of sounds you cannot hear becomes more personal. Even without tinnitus, your brain is constantly engaged in what might be called predictive hearing. It uses patterns it has learned over a lifetime to anticipate what sounds are likely in a given context. When those expectations are met, the brain can process input more efficiently, sometimes even filling in missing information. When they are violated, attention is drawn more strongly to the unexpected. This prediction shapes what you fail to hear as much as what you do. In a familiar environment, many expected sounds like the hum of appliances or the murmur of distant traffic are predicted so well that they attract little attention. They become part of an implicit model of the world, present but not salient. Only when they change unexpectedly, a refrigerator stopping, a car horn blaring, do they break through. From this angle, the sounds humans cannot hear include not only those outside physical limits and those filtered out by masking or inattention, but also those so perfectly predicted that they do not need to be noticed. The brain, confident in its model, allows them to blend into the background. This predictive, selective, adaptive system is remarkably robust. It lets you navigate complex acoustic environments, learn languages and music, and respond quickly to important events. It also lets you, when you choose or when fatigue demands it, withdraw from the world of sound, letting most vibrations go by without protest. As you lie in the dark and feel sleep drawing closer, you can sense this withdrawal in action. Sounds that would have captured your interest during the day now seem distant, unimportant. The brain spotlight of attention narrows and dims. The physical sensitivity of your ears has not changed dramatically in a few minutes, but the thresholds for what will be allowed into consciousness have risen. At some point, perhaps without you noticing the exact moment, external sounds fall away entirely from experience. Dreams arise carrying their own internal soundscapes, voices, noises, music that feel as vivid as those of waking life. During these times, the distinction between heard and imagined sound dissolves. The ears may still be transducing vibrations, but they no longer drive the main narrative of experience. This nightly procession from wakefulness through drowsiness into sleep recapitulates, in miniature, the core idea of this entire exploration. The world of possible sound is always larger than the world of heard sound. Your access to that larger world is always filtered by anatomy, history, context, and state of mind. That filtration is what makes rest possible. Knowing this, you can let go of the urge to pull every unheard vibration into awareness. You can appreciate, instead, the quiet choreography by which your body and brain decide, moment by moment, what will become sound for you and what will remain part of the inaudible background. In tracing all these threads, a simple question has unfolded into a wide tapestry. Why can humans not hear certain sounds? Because sound in the physical sense is broader than sound in the experiential sense, and the bridge between the two is necessarily narrow. On one side of that bridge lies the objective world of vibration, pressure waves spanning an enormous range of frequencies and amplitudes, generated by everything from subatomic events to planetary motions. On the other side lies your subjective world of hearing, patterns that have crossed thresholds of detection, passed through anatomical and neural bottlenecks, survived evolutionary cost-benefit tests, and earned the brain's limited attention. Between these sides stand the structures of the ear, the properties of hair cells and neurons, the history written in your genes and your experiences, and the ongoing choices your brain makes about what to highlight and what to ignore. Each one removes some potential sounds from your awareness, but each also makes what remains more meaningful, more manageable. The sounds you cannot hear too low, too high, too faint, too masked, too expected, too internal, too relevant are not failures. They are the complement to the sounds you can. Together, they define the shape of your auditory life. As you let yourself drift further towards sleep, you do not need to hold any of this detail in mind. It is enough to know, in a soft, general way, that the quiet you are entering is supported by countless selections and omissions, by body and brain that have learned, over eons and over years, how to let most vibrations go. The world will go on vibrating in your absence from it. Infrasound from distant storms will arrive and pass. Ultrasound from small, quick events will flicker and fade. Machines will hum, animals will call, structures will resonate. Your ears will continue to do their quiet work, but your awareness will loosen its grip. In that loosening, the narrow band of sound that usually accompanies you can shrink to almost nothing. Perhaps a last distant noise, a final creak, a soft breath. Then even those pass from notice, and the rich, unheard ocean of vibration becomes, for you, a gentle, holding silence.